welcome.
I'm gonna start letting people in. Okay. For people who are already in, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat, go for it. My name's Sophia Ryan, and I'm gonna moderate today. We'll do introductions. Give folks a few minutes to trickle in, and then we'll get started. For your great music, Gabby. Gabby always brings the tune. You can feel it, people feel it, rhythm as a dancer, rhythm. You feel it, people feel it, rhythm as a dancer.
Let the rhythm ride, you got you. Speak inside, you set your mind to move to its pulsation, bass vibrations and sensation. Pause, it's not in place. Mind and body must be free to please take it all in. Nothing to lose, everything to win. Let it control you, hold you, mold you, not the older. New, touch it, taste it, free your soul and let it base you. Got to be what you wanna. If the group don't get you, I'm gonna. I'm serious as cancer when I say rhythm is a dancer. Rhythm is a dancer. It's a source companion. People feel it everywhere. Lift your hands and voices, free your mind and join us. You can feel it in the air. Oh, it's a passion. Oh, you can feel it. It's a passion. Rhythm, you can feel it, people feel it. Rhythm as a dancer. Rhythm, you can feel it, people feel it. Rhythm as a dancer.
Gabby and Jolene, I know we're expecting a few more people. Are we ready to kick it off? Okay, awesome. Hi, everybody. So excited to be here today. We have an incredible group of panelists that are going to talk to us today about harm reduction. I wanted to kick things off just briefly with how today's going to be organized, and then we're going to do a little icebreaker. Gabby is the queen of icebreakers. They are so wonderful. She's taught me all about these, but I just wanted to start. My name's Sophia Ryan. I volunteered with PHE as an undergrad when I was a student at Barnard and taught the drug curriculum for 3 years. It was a formative experience for me, and it's such a privilege to be able to moderate today. And I just love PHE, so I'm really happy to be here. Quickly, so the way that the panel will be organized today, a brief icebreaker exercise, which I mentioned. I'll go over a few housekeeping points. Then Gabby's going to walk through a brief presentation on PHE. I'll then introduce the panelists. We'll have our panel discussion where we'll focus on 4 topics, and then there will be an opportunity for a Q&A at the end. So I just wanted to give everyone a lay of the land. So without further ado, I think we'll start the icebreaker. If everyone can click the link in the chat, you should be taken to our icebreaker where you can submit your responses. And let us know if you have difficulty finding that. You can also go to the Menti website and type in the code on your phone if that's easier. And I can read out for us. So the first question, what words come to mind when you think about harm reduction? There's some great responses. So judgment-free, compassion, support, care, equity, safety, inclusion. These are lovely responses. Inclusion, judgment-free. Good. Difficult. Self-love. Public health. Empathy. Great responses. Opportunity, I see in the chat. Humanity, together, hard. Great, thanks for sharing that, Gabby. Maybe we'll do one more minute with this prompt and then move on to the next question. These are great responses. Communication. Care. Supportive. Okay, awesome. So next question, what are some ways you can practice harm reduction? And I'll read again the responses aloud as they come in. This is a harder one. Providing accurate information. Absolutely, part of the ethos of PHE. Needle exchange. Don't preach at people. Meet people where they are. Self-compassion again. These are moving fast, let's see. Providing safe spaces. Carry Narcan. Radical acceptance, educating others, meditate, reach out. Help people make connections. These are wonderful answers. Listening, reach out. Fentanyl testing, therapy. Have compassion, being compassionate, building a support system. Staying mindful. Carrying Narcan again. Test your drugs if you're able. Alex in the chat. Listen without judgment. Affirmations. Celebrate small wins. Okay, these are wonderful responses. Thank you guys so much for participating in this little icebreaker. Gabby, thank you for facilitating. So I'll just run through being mindful of the time. So just a few housekeeping things, if we could please everyone could just be mindful of their mics and keep their mics muted until the Q&A portion at the end. We'll be inviting everyone on the call today to ask our panelists questions. If you feel comfortable, we'd love to encourage everyone to turn their cameras on, so we can see your faces and you can express yourselves as Gabby goes through her presentation and we move on to the panel discussion. I want to also share that the meeting is being recorded, so just want to give everyone a heads up there that this presentation is recorded. I think that covers our housekeeping items, and I'll turn it over to Gabby, who's going to share more about Peer Health Exchange.
All right. Hi, everybody. How's it going? My name is Gabby Herencia, the Director of Community Giving here at Peer Health Exchange. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. And to learn more about harm reduction for young people, before we dive deeper, I'm just going to give you all a quick overview about our organization, Peer Health Exchange. So our mission is to build healthier communities with young people. Together, we create education opportunities for peers to share the tools and resources young people need to make healthy decisions. Our vision is that together, with our partners, we will advance health equity to improve outcomes for young people in under-resourced communities. Young people are struggling. More than 1 in 3 high school students had experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, even before the pandemic. Reports are showing the mental health related emergency room visits are up 31% in the pandemic. Black, Latinx, and LGBTQ young people are at an even higher risk. Here at Peer Health Exchange, we provide health equity curriculum to young people across the US. We educate young people in sexual health, mental health, and substance use to increase health behavior. We empower young people to make active, informed choices that contribute to better life and health outcomes. We meet young people where they are, and in doing so, we created a website and phone app called Self-See. Self-See provides young folks people like Wendy and other folks that we serve in our high school partners with the support, resources, and stories from other young adults. This app was designed together by young people, for young people, and we encourage anyone who's looking for a supportive and inclusive community to download the app today. Today, we're partnering with amazing panelists in an effort to engage in a dialogue around substance use, harm reduction techniques, and how to make healthy decisions with and for young people so we can continue supporting all young people wherever and whenever they need it, whoever they are. We are looking to extend our reach to as many young people as possible. By making a donation today, you can support our mission and provide more young people with access to health equity. Please consider making a gift that's meaningful to you by clicking the donation button on our event registration page. And I believe Jolene is going to drop the link. So if you are able to and have the capacity, please consider clicking the donate button at the page where you registered. If you'd like to take your support a step further, we're currently recruiting folks to be peer fundraisers for Peer Health Exchange. As a peer fundraiser, you will have the opportunity to raise $500 through your personalized fundraising page, supporting our $15,000 end of the year campaign. If you're interested in becoming a peer fundraiser with us, you can join the other 10 alumni who have committed to this movement. And Jolena will drop the link to our peer fundraising page. So if you're interested, please feel free to click create a fundraiser. And also just thank you for letting me share some information about the work we do here at Peer Health Exchange. I hope that after today, we can feel like experts in harm reduction. So I'm gonna pass it back over to Sophia.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And again, too, there will be time at the end for the Q&A with the panelists, and we can also incorporate any potential questions related to PHE as well at the end of today's panel. So is it possible to get the panelists up spotlighted as well while I'm introducing faces? Amazing. There's Sasha. Awesome. Ariana, Alex, and Wendy. Okay. So I'm going to start with Wendy. So Wendy Marroquin. Wendy is a high school senior at USC's Hybrid High School in Los Angeles, California. Wendy is currently interning as a peer-to-peer youth consultant with PHE. Pretty incredible. And at their school, Wendy has been a student government member and volunteered for youth advocacy nonprofits like Pure Health Exchange, and recently joined the California Surgeon General's task force to reimagine behavioral health in the state of California. Wendy, I was doing none of that when I was in high school. We're so happy to have you here. Ariana Barton. Ariana Barton is a social worker and a self-described product person, currently a product manager at Mind Right Health. Ariana was a health educator for PHE as an undergrad at UC Berkeley and went on to earn her master's of social work from USC's School of Social Work. Ariana has worked across the country exploring the intersection of social work and social innovation, and is here to offer both her professional and personal experience, having begun her own recovery journey at age 17. Then Alex Dittmore. Alex is a training and content development coordinator at the National Harm Reduction Coalition, where she has worked since 2017. Alex has years of prior experience in organizing and educating at the peer level on both harm reduction surrounding drug use, as well as sexual health and consent. Her professional experience includes conducting and leading street outreach services, managing a drop-in center, overseeing and administering sexual health services, and directing and reporting on multiple programs related to harm reduction. It's hard to concisely introduce these panelists because there's such a breadth of experience, but welcome, Alex. And finally, Sasha Simon. Sasha Simon is a PHE board member and longtime health educator and youth mentor, and is currently the principal at Sasha Simon Consulting. Sasha is responsible for the development and evaluation of the country's first harm reduction based drug education curriculum for 9th and 10th grade students. It's called Safety First, Real Drug Education for Teens at the Drug Policy Alliance. Sasha earned her master's in public health from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health in 2012. And again, it serves on the board of PHE. We're delighted to have her with us today. Welcome, Sasha. So warm welcome to all the panelists, Wendy, Alex, Sasha, and Ariana. We're so happy to have you guys here. Thank you so much for your time today. So transitioning into our topics for the panel. To preface, we're going to cover 4 categories: substance abuse, harm reduction, healthy decision-making and approaches to healthy decision-making, and finally, resources. And again, there will be time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to think about questions as we're going to go through with the committee's list of questions for the panelists. And then if anyone would like to add or would like to discuss a particular topic that we don't get to, there will be time at the end to go over those. So I'd like to start, if we can, with Wendy on the topic of harm reduction, which we're all here today to explore. And I'd love to hear from you, Wendy. What does harm reduction look like for young people? If you want to take a stab at that first.
Yes, I just wanted to say hi to everyone. It's a wonderful day and I'm very, very grateful to be here. Harm reduction for young people looks like maybe getting at the cause of why some young people are even using drugs at times. I know sometimes it's like, oh my God, young people should not be using drugs and everything, but sometimes it's the only coping mechanism they really know, especially in Black and Brown communities. It's therapy and actual mental health resources are very scarce at times and also very looked down upon. So unfortunately, some young people turn to drugs, and it's not always the best thing, but there needs to be a more in-depth look at why.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wonder if we can go around. So we're starting with harm reduction, and then we're going to move back into substance abuse. But just given that the panel is focused on harm reduction, we want to explore the role of harm reduction. And that's a wonderful answer. Thank you, Wendy. Maybe turn it over to Alex. Just to
There we go.
harm reduction. What does harm reduction look like for young people?
Yeah. So harm reduction, what it looks like for young people. So I was lucky that I got to get into harm reduction. Well, I mean, I'm still young, but when I was a younger person and like a teenager and preteen still, I think harm reduction for young people looks like including young people in conversations, having realistic conversations about what drugs actually are and what drug use is going to look like, and not infantilizing them. So talking down to them and things like that, like they can't have these conversations, because the reality is different drugs show up in different communities depending where you are. Some folks might have their first intro drug be cannabis, and for some it might be methamphetamine, depending where you are. So I think it's like genuinely having conversation with young people and giving them good information about what things actually are so they can make informed decisions.
Thank you. And Ari?
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing that harm reduction is it's not an abstinence only approach. Harm reduction recognizes that no one will ever achieve perfect health behaviors. And so we look at it as a spectrum to lifelong choices and decision making. Harm reduction also looks like valuing a young person to say, you are an expert of your own life and your own choices, and I respect you and acknowledge you as an individual, and then working with the young person for whatever they need to meet their own individual goals, not in a one-size-fits-all approach.
Thank you, Ari. And last but not least, Sasha.
Yeah, I feel like it was summarized pretty perfectly, but I would just highlight the phrase that comes up often in harm reduction is meeting young people where they're at. I really appreciated what Ariana spoke about in terms of the spectrum of substance use behavior across the life course. So I think there's this assumption that people use substances only for coping reasons or harmful reasons, wherein you might be prescribed a substance that you use. If you are seeking out help and you go see a therapist and you were prescribed a medication, it's really important that people be able to have a conversation around substance use that doesn't stigmatize the type of substance that you're using, why you're using it, and there's no assumptions about if you're a good or bad person, or why you're using it. So yeah, I would just reemphasize everything that everyone said, and it's really about meeting young people where they're at.
Thank you. Okay. So with that framing, moving into substance use. So I'd love to stick with you, Sasha. In your experience, what kinds of substances show up for young people the most and the least in the context of harm reduction?
The top three tend to be alcohol, as well as tobacco products like vape pens and vaping, as well as cannabis. Those tend to be kind of the top three. And a lot of harm reduction techniques that are taught to young people typically are centered around alcohol, because that is across the board typically legal by the age of 21. Vaping has been really a mess over the past few years. Sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's legal for some people, sometimes it's not legal for other people. So that can be kind of a mess to get into. And then cannabis is, goodness, legalized not even just on a state-by-state basis, but also city-by-city basis, municipality by municipality. So it can feel very messy to get in that conversation with young people, because the city you live in might be in the middle of, passing a new drug law, and, you don't know which way it's going to go. So what kind of information can I give? But when it comes to harm reduction and where we're meeting young people in terms of substance use, it tends to center around, in my experience, alcohol, vaping, We've done a great job of curbing cigarette use over the past few decades, and also cannabis. And more you see a bit more mention of fentanyl since it's coming up in so many different drug supplies. But those tend to be the themes that I see.
Certainly, I know, and I'm tuning in from the Bay Area where fentanyl is very much a part of the conversation. I know nationwide, but especially in San Francisco, also on the ballot with the backdrop of the midterms, flavored cigarettes, stuff like that. So that certainly resonates. Wendy, I'd love to turn that over to you. In your experience, what kinds of substances show up for you and your peers the most? And you
Yeah,
can
so
also the least too, if you'd like to weigh in on that.
yes, so I'm currently residing in Los Angeles, so I feel like substances are something that are used very common, especially alcohol, cannabis use, and unfortunately now fentanyl, especially in young people. And it's very much scary, I feel, as a young person, because sometimes, let's say you get something, unfortunately, what happens if it's fentanyl? We've seen cases in there's a high school here called Bernstein, and unfortunately they've had, I think, 2 overdoses because of fentanyl use, and the people who were consuming it or consuming the drug weren't even in the know that it was even fentanyl. And so we see a rise of are we whatever young people are consuming, is it really safe for them, or is it just a way into their untimely death? So I think mainly for me it's a bit of fear, but yeah.
Absolutely. And you're seeing, I know you mentioned the alcohol and sort of echoing some of the substances that Sasha mentioned. Alex or Ariana, either one, would you like to, are there additional drugs that you see that come up that you feel are worth mentioning outside of those that we've talked about?
Absolutely. So I would consider alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana as the easy access drugs. And then there's 3 additional categories of prescription drugs, party drugs, and sexualized drugs. And so I think what I see most commonly as prescription drugs would be the abuse or misuse and also selling of Adderall, Xanax, codeine, Oxycontin, Percocet, and Vicodin. I can say from my own personal experience being in recovery, I was introduced to drugs at a very young age, but my introduction came from a prescription medication that turned into misuse behavior and then escalated from there. We also want to consider party drugs, and these are drugs that are not necessarily going to be used on a daily basis, but that's really common with experimentation among young people. So those are things such as stimulants and hallucinogens. So commonly that would be cocaine, ecstasy, mushrooms, LSD, or ketamine. And then the last category that I referred to is sexualized drugs. And these are drugs that are taken recreationally to facilitate sexual activities. And commonly that's methamphetamine and GHB.
Maybe building on those categories are helpful for me, at least, Ariana, to sort of start to think about these different groups of drugs. Alex, do you want to add to that at all in terms of just reemphasizing?
I would say, again, emphasizing geographic location, it depends. I was raised before I moved to Hartford, Connecticut, I lived in Northern California. And one of the first drugs that I was introduced to was methamphetamine. And that was when I was in elementary school. But I lived in an area where everyone's parents did methamphetamine, everyone's older siblings did it. Like, it would be rare for you to not have that. So I think that it really depends where you are, because when I moved to the boonies in the woods of Connecticut, that was definitely not the case. And it was more of the easy access drugs, like someone's breaking in a liquor cabinet. But I would also emphasize, like, it's really honestly what, no surprise, the young person was saying, Wendy, when they were talking about it's not knowing what you're getting. So what I mostly see, especially with young folks, is that you think you're getting one thing and then you end up getting something else. So a lot of folks are going to do that. More so what I always saw in my personal experience was usually, like what Ariana said, stemming from playing around with prescription to then going into something else. Like a lot of people will use Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin, whatever, in order to like get through midterms, finals, a project, something like that. And then you might try like Molly sometime because it seems fun, or like powder cocaine. And these are drugs that like you used to be able to experiment with. And now you don't know what you're getting. And so what used to be something that for decades and decades was allowed to be utilized, or at least more socially acceptable, depending on what it is, now you don't even get a chance because it might have fentanyl in it. But in my experience, I worked at a syringe exchange mostly. So I was working with injection drug users primarily. So mostly it was folks who had cross-contamination of fentanyl and the stuff that they didn't want. And people that were similar to my upbringing, which were that we were raised around a lot of illicit substance use at a young age. So for us, our exposure was what others call harder drugs.
Thank you, Alex. And Alex, as you were talking, Wendy, I saw you nodding along to a lot of what Alex was saying. I'm curious, do you have anything more you want to add to that, or specifically around kind of what leads young people and peers to using substances in the first place? Does that seems like a lot of that was resonating?
Yeah, I think just seeing people mainly. And then yeah, I think with the hard drugs, quote unquote, feel like it's sometimes part of the community, and you don't realize it's actually a bad thing until you go out into the world and you experience more of the world, and then like you're conversing with people and they're like, oh, I didn't know in your community they were doing this. That's such a shocker. Are you okay? It's like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, why wouldn't I? But it's also, you see a lot of the people you know in your community fade away, unfortunately. I don't know. I did resonate a lot with it, and I was just remembering what I was seeing in my neighborhood, and yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was like, one thing
Go ahead,
I
Alex.
was like, because it specifically talked about like growing up with it, something that I saw that was wildly different was going from like the stigmatized drugs, that's why I said harder drugs, because it's what's more stigmatized. If you tell your friend that I experimented with powder cocaine, they might have a reaction, yes, but I guarantee you their reaction will not be as big as if you said that you tried crack cocaine. And the only difference is literally baking soda and cooking something. Like you add baking soda in a process and some water, and that's it. That's the difference. And Adderall is amphetamine salts. It is very similarly structurally to methamphetamine. So it's wild to me that we'll have prescriptions, we'll be kids ourselves being prescribed Adderall, and then you'd be surprised that someone might develop some sort of dependency or might have a tolerance or might share it with their friend because they're not talking about it. Of course, they say don't share with it. Of course, they say don't drink with it. But it's like, you don't really know. You're all kind of trying stuff anyway. And there's no conversations. It just boggles my mind. And all these drugs are so similar, but some are so stigmatized and some aren't. I could talk about that forever, but yeah, sorry.
No, thank you so much, Alex, and thank you, Wendy, for sharing and exploring the role of stigma as it pertains to all of this. I think is something that we'll continue to do throughout the panel, and there's so much there. I wanted to move over back to Sasha for a moment, just as we're exploring the impact of these substances and specifically, as we discussed, peer health exchange on BIPOC communities and on young people with diverse backgrounds and in within their communities. Is there anything you might add to sort of the impact piece, and including referencing resources related to substance abuse, and just wanted to pass it over back to you to weigh in on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's also, it's a pretty heavy question when you're thinking about the impact of substance use. And so when you think about substance use, you think there's substance use education, there's also policy related to substance use, meaning how do we regulate substance use? How do we also regulate the criminality of substance use, and any health focus, if there is any, of substance use as well. And what I think most people know is that communities of color have, disproportionately been impacted by the war on drugs. And so you still see those impacts in real time. Families are still impacted. You've seen people who've not only disappeared because they've unfortunately passed away, but they've disappeared because they're in prisons and jails for substance use, possession, sale. There's people who've been locked away for decades, and that's decimated our communities. And we, young folks of color don't really have the space to talk about that, to be honest, and it's not really provided within traditional drug education structures, especially those that are abstinence only, because then you're not really giving folks the space to really think about what are the structures around me that have really kind of created my ideas around substance use, who drug users are, and what drug users deserve out of life. So it's been a mess in my opinion for communities of color, especially as you see the legalization and decriminalization of so many drugs who have sent so many people away, and now you see mostly white people just profiting out the ass on that, so it's kind of wild to deal with that. And then in our modern context, you drop the pandemic on top of all of that, where you see young people, everyone's trying to cope. You see drug use really go up across the board, and we're trying to figure out a way to manage how we've been trying to manage through all of this, while also recognize, oh, I have childhood trauma, or this childhood trauma is actually intergenerational, or it's created by the actual health policies that are codified within my life, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, depending on what state you were in or what age you are or whatever, there was something that was governing you, and that might have, either stifled you or, whatever in some type of way, even if the intent was to keep you safe. So I think when it comes to substance use for specifically young people of color, it's really important to give them the space to be able to talk about that, to be able to talk about the intergenerational impact of the war on drugs, so that there can be an evolution in the dialogue that's happening about why people not just use drugs, but also sell them, have them, profit from them. There's a much bigger structure around substance use besides, are you doing it or are you not doing it, and what's going to be your consequence?
Thank you. And I think that response so much in that, and that's a great sort of segue back into this category of harm reduction. And specifically, you mentioned curriculum not always creating the spaces, for everyone, and sort of the ways in which curriculum can be limiting. And one of the first curriculum that comes to mind is DARE, and also their sort of new the keeping it real, their sort of new branding there. And I'm curious if you don't mind sticking with you, Sasha, just for a moment, if you could speak to how today's harm reduction techniques differ from DARE's curriculum and from keeping it real. Saying that, I'm like sort of sorry.
Exactly. And Alex's expressions really encapsulated my feelings around keeping it real. Because if it's called keeping it real, I doubt that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, so the thing with the new DARE, it's still taught by cops. There's still cops that don't have a training in health education, like most of us here in this, room do. So we know how to teach about sensitive topics. We understand how to, to some extent, make sure our approach is trauma informed. We have some bases in harm reduction, even if we're not traditionally trained on harm reduction. It's still the goal of health education. So this DARE stuff, you still have cops going into schools who have no teaching background at all. They are provided training, but it's still insulting to the training that actual teachers have, and that health educators have and are required to have. And again, a lot of it is limited around the criminality of drug use. They do say they impart some communication skills and some decision-making skills and refusal skills, and that's great. But in my opinion, it's just a whole lot of ways to say no. And the data show that young people are not saying no, and that older folks are not saying no. And so it's really important for young people to have skills to be able to manage when they say yes to something, anything, a prescription, a cigarette, a drink, or whatever. When yes inevitably happens, then what? And I think that's where DARE is really limited.
Such a good point, just sort of the irony of this keeping it real organization that is ignoring the data and the information that tells us that most young people will say yes. Thank you, Ari or Ariana. I'd love to move back over to you to weigh in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sasha, I really appreciate what you shared. I think, instead of taking a fear approach, the approach that we want to take and the approach that harm reduction suggests that we take is an empowerment approach. Here's information for you to make a decision. You are now empowered to make your own decision, and you are also accountable for your decision. And so that decision can be in alignment with your values and something that you feel good about. And if you don't feel good about it, then you have a network of support people here that can help you. And that's a very different approach than a don't do it. And if you do it, you're gonna die or end up in jail.
Speaking of stigmas too, and how, right, how that's all wrapped up in this. Alex, to move back over to you, anything you want to add to that around harm reduction techniques? And
I always think it's funny because, I grew up with the commercial where, they crack the egg in the frying pan. They say, this is your brain on drugs. Or my favorite is they showed this girl, this chick who's completely deflated on the couch. And her friend is trying to talk to her, and they made it big on TikTok again. And I'm so glad, because it was so funny when it came out the first time too. And they're like, what's wrong with her? And she's like, this is how she's been since she started smoking cannabis. And it's like, she's totally deflated, lifeless. And I still chose to do drugs. So it's I watched those and I still chose to do it. So clearly it didn't work. I mean, I mentioned earlier, what I grew up around, and it's I chose not to do, quote, those drugs, because I was like, oh, I know not to do that. But everything else, even that was still told to me, it didn't matter. So I just laughed because it didn't matter anyway, even with the fear mongering. Even when it said that Molly would put holes in my brain and I would leak cerebral spinal fluid if I took it. All of these wild things. And if I cracked my back again, that I would start tripping. And that would be amazing, honestly. It'd save a lot of money. But that's not how it works. So it makes me laugh every time we talk about it, because it's never worked like that. Harm reduction for me as a young person was checking in on my friends. I think because I grew up around so many people whose family used drugs, we talked about it. You kind of, I'll be honest, trauma bonded. I mean, you trauma bond over the stuff that you've seen your family go through and your community go through. And I think that kind of allows for conversation more. And I used to be more of a square, more of a DARE type person, where I was oh no, if you do a certain threshold of drugs, that's wrong. I saw it ruin my family, seen it ruin your family, and it's all crap. We all use stuff for differing reasons. And I think that's, whether it's young people, old people, middle people, whatever, it works for all of us. We're all going to do it at different times in our life. Why I used drugs at 15 is different than why I used them at 19, which is different than why I used them at 25, which will be different when I use them at 45. But I think it's applicable no matter what. But yeah, those commercials are hilarious. And if you haven't seen the deflated girl, it's really, really funny. And I love them. They're really bad.
Ariana, go for it. Did you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you. So Alex, I appreciate that you mentioned family. This reminds me from my personal experience, the DARE approach being the fear approach. With my mom, for example, she is a very conservative woman and took the approach for supporting my brother and I of, no, you're not going to use drugs. That's never going to happen. You're my children and I believe in you, so you'll be fine. And then when I did need help and I was trying to seek help, I didn't know how to talk to my mother because I knew that she would be so disappointed in me. And so I think the harm reduction approach can show up in not only this high level health education, but also within our own families and between parent child of how do you create that space to have a young person in your life or your own child to feel comfortable coming to you when they do need help, if that happens.
Thank you, Ari. And just to back to you, Wendy, I see you nodding along again, and curious if you have anything in particular you'd want to add to, and specifically around, perhaps, I don't know if you've seen the commercials that Alex was mentioning, but in your own experience too, sort of how you see stigma specifically around substance use.
I think my whole life I've seen so much stigma. It's quite insane at times, because my mother will always like, oh, if you do weed or drugs, you're a horrible person. And I don't think I'd be a horrible person if I did choose to do those. I feel like if I want to experiment, I can experiment. And I feel like that should be okay. I feel like more parents should be okay with if their child wants to experiment, because that is life. To be quite simple, life is to experiment, life is to do everything you haven't done. And I don't want to have regrets, but that's a topic for another day. But yeah, and I also think it's because a lot, or at least a lot of the people in my community are immigrants. And so in their homelands, drugs are very, very stigmatized, and they bring their stigma back to the United States. And so they continue this generational trauma of drugs, and then it keeps getting passed down. And I don't want to keep passing it down to people I know, my sister. And if I ever do choose to have kids, maybe not, I don't know. But I don't want to pass that idea of that drugs are bad. More, I want to pass on drugs are an option in this life, but don't always have to be. And I was going to respond to another question. Oh yeah, and then the like woman melting on the sofa, I saw it like literally last night. I was laughing so hard. So it's funny that you mention it. But yeah, I think I've also seen it though, like when it was running on TV or something. But I do remember specifically like drug commercials and like the fear mongering, and I don't think I see that. I don't think I've ever seen anyone high melting on a couch. So I'm very thankful for that.
Nor have I imagined, right? No, thank you. So this is a question, Wendy, go for it if you'd like to take this question, or Sasha, I'd love to hear from either one of you on this, but sort of, I think that on the topic of stigma, but also sort of what prompts, just to kind of return briefly to what prompts young people to use drugs in the first place, is that if there's anything specific you would kind of add to that. I know we touched on it, but just to return to that for a moment, I think it is kind of like related to these, as we're on the topic of like commercials that show us experiences that are difficult to relate to or seem like they're totally tone deaf or out of touch. What you feel like is kind of prompts people to use substances in the first place.
I think unfortunately, people, low-income communities and Black and Brown and all different types of minority communities unfortunately see the bad side of life. They see their families and not be able to make enough money at times. They've seen food deserts, like the only thing sometimes for miles is a McDonald's and like a Rally's. And then what's it called? They've seen a lot of crime. And I think I sometimes what's it called? I have a lot of fear with like really loud noise, and it's because I've grown up with a lot of helicopters, with a lot of ambulances, with a lot of police cars just going around and around where I live. And so that creates a lot of anxiety. And I know that doesn't only create anxiety inside of me, but in young people that I know. And so when we have anxiety and when we have even possibly PTSD, and we have communities that don't know how to support us through therapy and actually providing safe spaces to talk about what we've seen, sometimes the only way we cope with is, let's say, cannabis or even alcohol. And that's all we really know our older adults doing. So I feel like they've set an example, quote unquote, but not really. because that's the only thing they knew as well. Yeah, but I'll give it to Sasha as well.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Sasha.
Yeah, and I want to build on your response a little bit, Wendy, because I think you brought up a good point. But when I think about stigma and substance use among young people, two completely different thoughts come to mind. The first one is that the more you're hush hush, the more you're abstinence based, the more you're fear based around any type of health topic, the more you kind of shroud the thing in mystery. It gives this like air of mystique where I can't speak openly about it. I'm going to do it in the shadows. I'm going to hide it from my parents. I'm going to hide it from these friends. I'm just going to hide it. And so there is this idea that you can't have open, honest, health-based conversations about this thing because there's already been this schema around mystery and stigma, and it's wrong about it. So the issue around stigma and drug use and like programs like DARE that are like, it's bad and only bad people do it, is again, when reality, you know, faces that, which is the reality that most people try some type of substance at some point. A lot of folks keep it low key. A lot of people don't know how to speak about the fact that they're using substances. A lot of people don't know how to speak to the fact that they're misusing substances and that they need help and that they want help, because we've stigmatized them and we've arrested people who use drugs and who sell drugs. So we've made it super scary, super duper scary, by bringing cops into schools to make it even scarier, you know, and there's just so many levels to the scary. But we've made it super scary for people to speak openly about the fact that they use drugs, and especially for young people, because most drugs are illegal for folks under the age of 21. So it's even extra scary. Am I going to go to jail? Am I going to get in trouble? Is someone going to give me medical help when I need it and then send me to jail? Like, what's going to happen? I have no clue. Like, it's scary. It's super scary. So there's that. And then I would go back to the point that Alex mentioned around geography. So different drugs are stigmatized differently based on where you are. So for example, I lived in New York the past 11 years. I currently live in Salt Lake City, Utah, where for some subsects of the community, even caffeine is something you should not be touching. So I didn't know that till I got here. And when I'm in New York, I can, you know, easily just go out on the stoop and, you know, smoke my favorite substance and go about my day and nobody's worried about me. Can't do that in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a whole different world. And on top of that, the built environment is different. So I remember one of the biggest complaints I heard when it came to the legalization of cannabis in New York, where there would be a lot of folks in NYCHA housing, which is the New York City public housing, that were like, we just don't like the smell. We don't want the smell in our huge, you know, multi 10, 20, 30 story buildings, right? That we all share together, you know, thousands of people in one building. I don't want to smell it. You don't see housing projects in Salt Lake City, Utah. So geography, where you are, your built environment has a huge impact. The surrounding ideologies and, you know, religious factions that might rule in that space, that has a lot of input on stigma and who's doing what and why they're doing what.
So much there, and the theme of just geography impacting kind of how we, adding that as a layer to this, I think is really helpful. And I know, so Wendy, you're in LA. Sasha, are you based in New York? I know we have the panel just to get a sense of the spread, because I know Ariana is in California. Alex, you are East Coast, just to give context. And are you in New York as well, Sasha?
I've been in Salt Lake City, Utah for the past year, but I was in New York for 11 years prior.
Okay. I just think that's such a helpful distinction. So thank you so much. Ariana, did you want to add anything to that before we move on to the next bucket?
Yeah, I think I can speak about it from personal experience of, I think when we look at geographic, we can also look at environmental norms. And so for me growing up, my environmental norm was very much so personal problems are something that's kept to yourself or within your household. And also we have drugs around us, and So I'm not talking about what's going on in my head and my mental health, but I'm seeing that people are using substances as a way to manage their mental health. And so, you know, I'm 12, 13 years old. I may as well try that because it seems like it's working for the people in my life. And so I think that that's also something that Alex has talked about is just general exposure based on where you grow up and who you grow up around. That we have to contextualize that for young people of not just their peers, but their family members and neighborhood and general community. What does substance use look like? And how easy is it for youth to access those substances?
Thank you, Ari. That's great. We had as we were discussing this, we did have a question come in from the audience about PHE providing guidance for parents to speak with their kids about substance use. There was actually an article too, I think the New York Times, that came out maybe a week ago specifically about this as well. I don't know if anyone on the panel saw that piece, but I am curious if we could spend a moment just to touch on this topic and sort of how to talk to young people about substance use, and if maybe Sasha or Alex, if you'd like to sort of weigh in on those conversations.
Sure. So when it comes to talking about it, so disclaimer, because a lot of people care about this, I'm not a parent. So this is coming from someone who is not a parent, who hasn't, you know, had my child since day one and had to see them be the baby. And now you have to look at your baby and have these conversations that feel so grown that you don't feel ready for yet. So I think that for parents, the big thing is remembering who you were at that kid. It could be helpful, but also remembering that who you were at that age isn't necessarily who your child is at that age. There's a lot of comparison with that. I say that in the sense of we forget what it was like to be young, and you think it's so much younger when you're separated from it. You're like, no way, I was a baby. And then you think about it and you're like, no, I definitely thought that I was 100% grown at like 15 years old. Like I was convinced and didn't trust if you were over a certain age to really talk to me, because I didn't feel like you got it, and you didn't, because you really don't know what it feels like. And being a teenager sucks. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it in a nicer way. I was thinking the whole time how to put it in a nicer way, but I had the same conversation with my 18-year-old niece. Being a teenager sucks. I don't wish it on anyone a second time around. And I think remembering that is helpful. So it's just like your kid already is nervous to talk to you. You're their parent. No matter who you are, no matter how you're raised, no one wants to disappoint their parents. So I think it's just like asking them questions and understanding that they're probably going to lie to you, or at least withhold a lot of information until they realize maybe I can let you know a little bit more. But like that's what I did with my mom for sure. You test the waters the most you can, and then you kind of get into it. So I would say like really addressing it within yourself, checking yourself, remembering it already sucks to be in this state, like in this place, in this age. It's so confusing as is, even though it seems small in comparison to other things. But like kind of like checking ourselves again and being realistic as best we can. It's going to take time though, regardless, because I think that you could be the most open-minded, accepting parent, and it still would take time for your kid to actually want to talk to you about those things. Even if you are a perfectionist, it's way harder. I promise it gets better when you're a teenager, by the way, sorry. And if you loved being a teenager, I'm really happy for you.
Sasha, did you want to add to that at all?
I feel like Alex hit it on the head. The only thing I would add is like drugs, the drug supply, drug laws, like all of that changes all the time. So, you know, as you're an adult, the things that you've grown up to understand about drugs and access and how to use it or whatever, it might be very different than your teenager. So I think it's being honest about that, being honest about the things you don't know and being curious alongside with them. Like, I wonder, like, how much more potent is cannabis than the cannabis, you know, I used to smoke back in the 80s. Let's look it up, you know, and you can make a comparison, and then they can see that and that huge difference. And then hopefully that might help moderate their behavior a little bit. But I think demonstrating that curiosity alongside of them so that they understand that they can be curious and they can seek out health information, I think that's one of the best things you can model as a parent.
Making it relatable, absolutely. And Ariana, I'd love to hear from you, and Wendy, if you're still with us, but maybe your camera's off, I'd love to hear from you too on the flip side, kind of from your perspective, what typically resonates. How did those answers feel? And if there's anything you would add, maybe we'll quickly go to Ari first and then to you for the other side.
Yeah, I think also practicing having other types of conversations that might be uncomfortable and talking about how those conversations go and asking the child for feedback of what can I do to support you? How did you feel about the way that I responded? Why is this uncomfortable for us to talk about? Just opening up those questions. And those are challenging conversations. But I think it's really, it can be an amazing thing for a parent to be honest with their child about acknowledging what the emotions are for themselves between, like, in a conversation, to acknowledge, like, this is uncomfortable and I'm not quite sure what to say. Let's talk about it together. How are you feeling?
Thank you, Ari. And Wendy.
Yes, I think most definitely there needs to be some level of trust before even trying to ask these questions. If, like, my mother out of nowhere asked, as someone in the chat box said, like asked about weed, I was like, I'd be like, oh wow, this is very, very random. Why are we talking about this now? I don't even think I'm comfortable talking about this with you. This feels very much out of your age group, but I'm kidding. But I don't think I'd feel the most comfortable talking about it with her because we haven't established enough trust, or even trust about illicit drugs. And so I feel like I'd be caught very off guard. I think what young people want, or at least what I would want, is some trust at first, and obviously, like, baby steps to everything. There will always be baby steps to having these hard conversations. And as Ariana said, there needs to be an introduction of different type of hard conversations before jumping into this one, which feels very, very grown. And parents don't see us as grown sometimes, even though we might not be. I feel 27 while being 17, so I have a lot of duties. But sometimes parents don't know a lot of the responsibilities young people have, and so that's why at the same time they see us as very little kids. I don't know. Trying to think what else I was gonna say, but it just left me. No, cannot remember it. But yeah, I think this would be my answer for now.
That was great. And we can return, if it comes back to you, let us know. We can certainly return to it. To segue, I just want to make sure we get to the 4 categories we wanted to discuss. So it's healthy decision making, and then we want to go over some resources, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. So to segue, and you touched on, Wendy, the importance of trust, and Sasha, Alex, and Ariana in different ways too, the importance of sort of having these conversations in ways that are relatable, and ultimately to what end, to better facilitate healthy decision making. And so on the topic of healthy decision making, maybe to start, if I could ping back to Sasha, how can we encourage help-seeking behavior for young people? And related to that, what communication skills might you be willing to share with us when talking about substance use in general? I know there's 2 parts to that, but would you mind kicking us off on that?
So just to make sure that I understood your second question, what
Yes.
communication skills would I suggest for folks when talking about drug use?
Yes. And feel free to, if that feels too vague. Just there's, for example, in Pure Health Exchange in the health curriculum, there's I believe it's the 4 C's, sort of orienting, just orienting frameworks that prompt young people to sort of think about things in a certain way. So that's sort of the direction there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So to answer your first question, how to encourage young people to use health-seeking behaviors, I think modeling it first and foremost. So sometimes that means taking the scary step to go get tested for STDs, even if you haven't for a really long time, you might be in a monogamous, whatever, just showing that that is a thing you can do, a regular practice that, will keep you safe. But even going to therapy, just modeling those things, talking about those things, normalizing those things, I think has really helped a lot of folks, but it especially helps, and it's helped for me within my family system and within my support system. When I see people really taking the initiative to heal and to be better, it really is inspiring and makes me want to do it. And I want to talk to them about it. And even if I'm not ready, at least I'm thinking about it and it's on my mind. And it's really exciting to know that I can be better. And I can be doing things or managing things better. So I think there's a lot of ways to encourage it, but I think modeling is a really big one, regardless of how you show up in a young person's life. And when it comes to communication skills, with young people, especially around harm reduction, I think the trust and the honesty is really key, and really giving them the space to speak their experience and let it be okay, and don't stigmatize it. And one really, really cool example I can share that's related to Pure Health Exchange, I was scrolling through Instagram the other day and a post came up, and you guys let me know if you saw it, but it was like, 4 benefits to moaning during sex. And so I'm scrolling through and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, double tap. Oh, Pure Health Exchange. The young people came up with this. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, I guess young people do moan during sex, and I had to get real comfortable with it real quick. I was not thinking about that before, but fair enough. Why wouldn't young people be moaning during sex? So it's about really allowing yourself to be infiltrated, and let them cross that barrier with you where, they're not doing those things. That's perfectly normal and healthy, and, and so yeah, give them the space to really be honest and be able to hold it. So practicing being able to hold their truth and normalizing what it is that they do, because it's really not that crazy.
I did in fact see that post. That's a great call out. I don't know who is managing. We'll have to maybe drop it in the chat who's managing Pure Health Exchange social media, because that was a great one post. Maybe Ariana, to move over to you so I can repeat the question. So encouraging help-seeking behavior for young people around substance use, and then communication skills, anything that you care to call out in terms of what's helpful when talking about substance use and building on perhaps what Sasha just shared.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those 2 things are very intertwined, help-seeking behavior and communication, because you can't have help-seeking behavior without good communication. I think starting with the communication as the foundation for building help-seeking behavior, keeping it casual, again, like what Sasha was saying, don't add the judgment, don't add the lecturing or the stigma. So ask open-ended questions and allow the person that you're communicating with, the young person, to lead the conversation, and ask for feedback along the way so that you can help pivot the conversation to make sure that they're still in the driver's seat. And then in terms of help-seeking behavior, I think a lot of that is, once you've developed that rapport, how are you actually helpful for that person? And you want to encourage the asking for help by being able to respond with helpful help, not harmful help. And especially when we're talking about historically underrepresented communities, we need to make sure that the help is helpful. And so that's allowing the youth to make decisions, and better yet, that they're making values-based decisions that's in alignment with their identity and how they want to live their life. And you're supporting them from that perspective.
Thank you. And well said in terms of help seeking behavior and communication, absolutely intertwined. Important point. Can I push it over to Alex? You want to take, we have a few more minutes to focus on this, then I want to make sure we have time to discuss resources before we go into Q&A.
Yeah, really just echoing on what Sasha and Ariana said, which is all of it. You can't really provide it if you're not modeling it, but also if you're not doing it for yourself. One of the greatest things that I feel like I've ever learned from my mom is to approach things with curiosity, including and most specifically yourself. So like as a parent, as an individual, it's why is this so uncomfortable for me? Largely it's because of how we're socialized. So you have your socialization and then you have the negative consequences you've seen of it. You know, like my sister is in long-term recovery now from very chaotic and illicit injection drug use. And you would think, you know, that because she understands harm reduction worked for her, that she would be able to have conversations with my niece who just graduated high school, but she can't. It is a complete shutdown because all she saw is what it did for her and how for her there was no spectrum. She just went from 0 to 100 real quick with her substance use. She didn't have people to talk to or other supports in place where maybe she could have had more of a spectrum use. And when I say spectrum use, I mean not just going balls to the wall, all of it at once, all the time, like something where you can come in and out of it. You can have a differing relationship with a substance or different substances at different parts in your life. But I always tell everyone in any training capacity of whatever the topic is, just be curious. So like be curious with your child. And when you are a peer, when you're a young person, be curious with yourself. Why do I want to do these things? Why am I drawn to it? You know, why am I drawn to the friends that I have? Why do I think that my friends might be drawn to it? We all do things that maybe are hard to understand. And I think just approaching things with curiosity helps take down some of the shame and some of that like understandable, like instinctual feelings that you have, particularly when it's young stuff, because like the moaning thing, when you said get real comfortable real quick, like is true because you know, I was out here too in my youth and like not like out here, but like I was doing grown things too. And like you don't think about it and you're like, I wouldn't want to talk about it with my flipping mom, but like it happens. And it's funny to me how you don't even got to get old and all of a sudden you get very, you know, clutching the pearls type quickly, where I'm like, oh my gosh, my baby niece is talking to me about that. I changed your diapers. And she's like, yeah, Auntie, but I'm like 17 now. Like I'm 17. I'm like, oh, yeah, true. And we have a lot of teen moms in this family. So clearly we were doing things. But yeah, modeling it, but I say doing it for yourself too. Like, sorry, I'm at my grandparents' house who still have a landline, as you can tell. No one has landlines no more. But that's what you hear. But yeah, for me, it's really just like also doing it for yourself. I think that there's all of this, a whole lot of pressure on young people to know everything that they are and what they want to do all the time. And for parents to have it right all the time, just because you're a parent. Like a parent isn't a product of their own lived experience and environment and other things, that it's just trying to do the best that they can do. I think that as a still young, but older young person, one of the most freeing things that I learned was that my mom is a person too. And every year I get older, I'm like, oh my God, my mom's like the whole person in the world on her own thing. She's not just my mom. Like, but she had to learn that I'm not just her baby. Like, I'm not just her kid, just her baby girl and all this other stuff. So it's a mutual relationship that I feel like strengthens over time. And like everyone said before me, it only strengthens over time because you have those conversations, and not just about drugs, but uncomfortable conversations in general. Like you have to talk about stuff like the weird phase where a lot of kids never want to bathe for some reason. Like they don't want to shower for some reason. And you got to tell your kid, listen, you kind of stink and you got to bathe. And like, I love you, but this is gross. Like a whole lot of different conversations that you got to have. It doesn't just have to be the big extremes, which is sex and drugs. It's always sex and drugs. It's like, there's a whole lot of weird stuff you got to do. We got to teach kids how to wipe their butt. Like, come on, you got to, like, everything comes with time.
So good too. And right, a part of
struggle.
self-care is wiping your butt. and also seeking out, right, mental health, just resources of all kinds. I really just loved your point about how I loved everyone's points, and to approaching kind of some of these conversations through the lens of also taking care of yourself, I think is really powerful. So the last question, or the last sort of a topic, is about resources, and I want to make sure we have enough time to cover these. So Wendy, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe we'll start with how can adults be better advocates and systems of support for young people? So kind of part one, and then are there any tools we should know about when it comes to substance use, or in your experience that you would like to call out? So on the topic of resources, how do you feel older people can be better advocates and systems of support for the youth?
I think it was, I can't remember who said, like practicing what they're modeling, what people model. I think it's fair. I resonate a lot with that, because I don't think I'm gonna accept advice from someone who has not maybe gone through my situation. It's a little difficult to really know how to practice it in a sense. I think first I need to see the adult actually doing what they're actually recommending me to do. And that could be, let's say, explaining their experience with therapy, or let's say explaining their conflict resolution practices in that sense, because sometimes there can be conflicts when talking about substance abuse or even substances at all. And then I think what I'd like from adults or older people, or people older than me, to do, I think really, really just listen. I don't want to hear your experience, at least at the moment. I want you to hear mine, and I want you to validate my experience, because that is what I'm coming for. Or at least I would be coming for validation. I don't know other people, but at least myself, I'd be coming for validation, for support, and compassion. I need more people to practice compassion instead of shame when it comes to very, I guess, shocking topics at times. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you repeat your second question?
Yes, there's a few, but emphasizing listening and compassion. Thank you. So there's actually a third question that we want to discuss on the topic of resources as well. But the second part was specifically any tools we should know about when it comes to substance use. And that's a little maybe awkwardly worded, but resources like that if there's like an Instagram account that you follow, or like a particular website, or like a community organization, even at your school, within your community, can be sort of on any stage, that is helpful to you in terms of access to information, anything that comes to mind.
Ooh, anything that comes to mind at the moment? No, because there's so many. But I think pushing for, I can't remember what the thing is called right now, but those like things that help with overdose. That I want more schools to have that on hand, especially with the increases of substance abuse at times at schools, and even the fact that there are lacing of fentanyl in different substances, and that is very, very dangerous. And a lot of people don't know how to even, what's it called? I don't even know how to deal with that. Like, how do you wake someone from an overdose? And many people don't know that. I cannot remember the specific drug to use. Can you remind me, please?
Narcan?
Narcan. Yeah. Yes. Narcan, to wake someone up and possibly save their life from an overdose. So I think there needs to be more push of that in different school districts. I know in LAUSD, we're already having Narcan. Yeah, Narcan. Narcan, that drug, to be distributed through different high schools. And so I'd like to see that in Oakland Unified, in, let's say, Utah, Salt Lake City Unified. Utah is the state, but yes, So I think that would be,
Thank you so much. And just Alex, so as a member of National Harm Reduction Coalition, are there specific around Narcan, anything you want to call out around that in terms of, maybe directing people to the site, or are there, just to push the question over to you for
So
resources?
for Narcan specifically, just like quick for people who don't know, Narcan is what reverses opioid overdoses. So it only works for opiates. The thing that's really cool about it though, is that if you administer it to someone who is not having an opioid overdose, it's not going to harm them. So if you're worried that someone maybe had something laced, like, oh, my friend maybe had some cocaine and now they fell out, they're not responding. I'm concerned they might be overdosing. If you give them Narcan, it's okay. There is a agency called Next Naloxone, and I can put the link in the chat too. Next Naloxone is a mail-based service, so they'll mail you Narcan, and that's really, I feel like that's good for some young folks, depending how your parents are with mail you receive, or if they know that you're someone who's like obsessed with Etsy or something, that you buy little stuff all the time, like maybe you can get away with it easier, or you can maybe have it sent to a trusted friend. But it's a way that you can have Narcan mailed to you, and they'll be able to give you an instructional of how to utilize it. But that is very, very important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex.
And yep, free without insurance. There's no tracking. You can put in a fake name. It does not matter. And it's all free. When I worked at another agency, I was the distro person for the state of Connecticut for it. And I actually had like a lot of young folks that would look out for it and that wanted it and they would say sometimes like, oh, why didn't you want it? Let's say like through your insurance or through a program. And they would say like, I don't want my family to know, or like something else. So that's very, very, very helpful. And did you want me to just answer that?
That's great. That was perfect for now. I want to hear more, but we're running out of time. I just to turn over. So we have 8 more minutes for Q&A. I haven't seen the questions come in yet, but I know there are a few from the audience. So I wanted to make sure we had just a little bit of time to maybe ask a few. I don't know if Gabby or let's see, Jolena have any that are top of mind. And also for the audience, I can just see the panelists at the moment, but if you're an audience member and you have a pressing question for the panelists, if you could raise your hand, and then the Gabby or Jillian will call on you. And I'll try to see if I can see you guys too.
Yeah, I can call out anybody who uses the raise hand reaction. So if anyone has a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to use the raise hand, or you can just unmute yourself and ask directly too.
And sort of, if people are formulating questions, maybe just to turn it back over to Sasha for a moment, if there's any particular resources you might want to call out.
Sasha is the resource.
Hell yeah. Okay.
Best compliment ever. I appreciate that. But I would actually just run down the list of what Alex put in the chat. She put the link to Safety First. The full curriculum is available for free at the Drug Policy Alliance's website. It's meant for teachers, but a lot of people don't know nothing about drugs, so it's a good resource for anybody. SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, is amazing because that is a peer-to-peer structure, and they do a lot of advocacy work around making sure they get the resources they want on campus. So they're super dope. I cannot speak to these last 2 resources that were shared between Ariana and Alex. I don't know if you guys want to speak about it a little bit more, but I just wanted to co-sign on what Alex had put in terms of SSDP and what the Drug Policy Alliance has as well.
That's great.
Yeah, and the resource I shared is just a generalist overview of harm reduction principles, and this can be harm reduction for substance use, but harm reduction across a variety of settings. I think that this is just great for contextualizing how to approach conversations with the mindset of harm reduction.
And then the one that I dropped, Next Distro. So they are the mail out Narcan, and I know the people who work there and run it. They're really, really awesome. But what's really good too for anyone, young people, parents, whatever, is they have a whole resource library on there as well, and it can cover safer drug use, safer injection use, drug overdose. It talks about drug users unions, wound care, sexual health. So there's a whole bunch of resources there too. And there is something under there for parenting, but you can always utilize that.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. I see it looks like Lauren may have a question. Lauren.
Hi, everyone. So first, thank you so much for being here. It's been fantastic, and I learned a lot personally. But I think this is a heated topic that is a question I have. I was just wondering, related to harm reduction, what do we think about decriminalization of drugs? As a pre-med, we've talked about how other countries in the world have started to decriminalize certain drugs, and I was just wondering if you guys felt that that would be important for harm reduction or would, cause more problems going forward. So just curious.
Thanks, Lauren. And Sasha, I know you cited this distinction too. Sasha, if you want to take that one, just this distinction between also criminalization and education and the tension there. If you want to.
Yeah, so Lauren, great question. I personally think decriminalization is an excellent step and a huge harm reduction technique that can be applied across broad communities. So I love the idea. And to clarify, decriminalization is to decriminalize the use or the possession of small amounts of specific drugs, whatever it is that the specific law pertains to. You might be seeing a lot around psilocybin, mushrooms, and things like that. You'll also see the decriminalization of cannabis in a lot of places. Just means that you won't be prosecuted or no charges against you. No one's going to bother you, essentially. And a lot of these decriminalization laws, excuse me, have already been on the books. I believe New York State's decriminalization law has been in place since the 70s. But you still had stop and frisk, you still had the rock, like you still had all these messy laws that lock people up, even though weed has been decriminalized for decades in New York State. So that's the other caveat, right? Is that decriminalization doesn't always mean that there is going to be an equitable enforcement of it. Folks still tend to find some way to want to harass Black and brown young people, and it's wild. Like there's always just some way they will find, but it's still a great step. I think it lends towards a great conversation around why does the drug need to be criminalized or penalized for its use or, just personal possession. And so sometimes those conversations can be a little cringy, in my opinion, because you really see some nasty stuff come out. But you also see some really good stuff come out, and you see people moving that needle towards, we don't need to lock people up. We don't need to shame people. We don't need to banish our family members. It's okay for them to receive, drug users to receive help in hospitals and then, not got to go to jail. It's such a great thing to do. I would love to see the legal regulation of most, if not all, drugs, because it's the only way I can think of to truly keep ourselves safe. If you have it regulated, that means it's tested, that means we have standards.